Hi, welcome to my channel. Just getting out today. Didn't feel like getting out, even though it's a beautiful day. I don't know. I've been kind of, feeling a little malevolent, right? You know what I'm trying to say. And it doesn't feel good, but we'll talk about it. Hold on. Okay, I've been waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting for the right time, the signal for me to be able to move, right? The signals of moving is usually, at best, is, you're told, hey, here's some money, here's a destination, go forward, right? That's the best way. That's the best way that you want things to happen, right? And I'm going to tell you, I really don't like the way people will force you out even though you haven't done anything wrong, right? They just want to force you out. They just want to exert control. I don't like that. All right? So, because I don't like it, it's made me resistant, right? It's like, yeah, you could have let me go, right? You could have let me go. There wouldn't have been no problem, right? Look how this bus is driving. This bus is driving in 2 lanes. Right? Because the lanes are just a suggestion. Now he's in a lane. I'm telling you, the way people are is just it's not for me. Right? And if they continue to be like this, they're going to deserve every single adversity that they bring upon themselves, right? Because this ideal that we're all one, we're all this, we're all that, is a lie. It's just a lie, right? While you're sitting up here thinking that you're all one and you're all suffering, and that's great because you're one, right? There's going to be many people out here that's not going to suffer. All right? You can mark my words on that one. I'll tell you no lie. So, and this is how, they will go back to their old ways of how they, maintain, their grasp on all of this land and shit, I'm talking about the South, okay? Let's keep it real. I'm talking about the South, right? The South will sit up there and act like, oh yeah, they were strong and mighty, and yet, what you didn't see was, all of the slaves that were sleeping in bungalows in the back, right? You didn't see the ones that, that was kept hidden. And they did keep them hidden. That's why it was like, black people, you use those toilets over there. Black people, you enter from the back, and they had that appearance that they were so sufficient. Okay? Now, the sad part about it is the black people that, cooperated, right? They cooperated and they felt like this was a good life. All right? And I can understand, how come they felt that way. I do. I do understand that, right? Because number one, they wasn't willing to, sell their soul to the devil, just to live, right? But in essence, they wasn't selling their soul to the devil, but they actually gave themselves away. They auctioned themselves off, right? They auctioned themselves off. And that's a shame, because we have people who will sit up here, all the time and say, oh, I was forced to do this. Oh, they made me do this, I had no other choice but to do this or that, right? That's the worst kind. That's the worst kind. Because here's the thing about it, right? You should never do anything unless you authorize it. Unless you have authorized it with your own thoughts. Right? Because either way, you're still authorizing it with your own thoughts. So you could do the wickedest deed under the guise that you're doing it, to feed your family, right? But, the ultimate test is that you were willing to do this and that, rather than something else. Right? So, even when I came to Texas, right, and people said, Texas is prejudiced, right? I was like, is it? This day and age, are they still prejudiced, right? And, they said that North Texas was a lot more racist than, Southern Texas. Now, mind you, it's interesting how their process of selecting who they let in, right? They'll let in somebody that they can control, right? So they dangle the carrot in front of them, they get them jumping and doing all of this and all of that, right? And then, they figure out some kind of way, to take them out eventually, right? Because that's the whole purpose of the game is, not to let them thrive, right? The whole purpose of the whole game is not to let them thrive, but to let them think that they're thriving, right? If you can get them to take themselves out, that's the best way, right? Because then you don't have to deal with, repercussions, and you let them take themselves out. However, right? we all have to pay, for, our debts, right? We all have to pay those one way or another. Okay? Yeah. That truck got a wide ass turn. It doesn't turn on a dime. don't know. I'm getting to the point where, you know, trying to hold on and to explain to people that, look, you know, I paid my dues, right? I have. I paid my dues, you know, and, you know, feeding off of the elderly it's not going to benefit you anything, because you're going to get old too, and you're not going to like it when you get fed off of. You're not. It's not going to feel good at all. And the future generation is not going to like it either, right? Because it's going to get to the point where people are like, well, what's the point? You know, if we're fighting to get stuff only to have the shit taken away from us, only to have us, you know, suffer a slow, torturous death, right? Of illness, of, you know, exposure, of depression, you know, of, you know, what's the point? What is the point? That's the one thing that people aren't talking about. You know, and they make it seem like, well, if you change your mind frame and say, no, you're not, you know, feeding off of the elderly and killing them a slow, torturous death, you know, what you should say is, you know, it's the elderly's fault that they didn't leave on their own and allow, you know, the young people to, you know, to raise and grow their families. And it's just like, what? Right? We don't hear it a lot right now, where people were like, well, you know, these old folks, they really need to downsize. And it's just like, why are you guys watching the old folks? You know, why are you watching the old folks? Right? And including some of these, you know, man babies who were like, they were going to kill their parents, you know, so they can get the inheritance from their parents because they want it now. Right? And then, you know, they're supposed to what? You know, act like nothing happened. Act like, oh, now, you know, they're supposed to be able to live this great life, you know, build a family. And when the kids ask what happened to, you know, what happened to Nana and Popo, you know, what happened to them, you know, and you know, it's just like, yeah, they died. Well, what happened to them? Right? And the Melendez brothers is like, well, you know, making up even more stories, just making up stories, you know. Lying. That's what it is. It's not making up stories. It's just lying. So then they have to lie. They have to lie to their family members and say, you know, a robber came in the house and killed their parents while, you know, everybody was asleep, and hope that nobody ever breaks it to them that that nobody ever breaks it to them that you know, their father, you know, killed their parents. Right? They killed 2 people. 2 blood, right? And now they want to be let out to live their lives, right? And technically they should have never gotten any of that money that, was associated with the parents. And that could be part of the reason why they did decide to kill the parents, is because the parents had said, if you don't change this and if you don't stop doing that, you're going to get disinherited. And that was a big consideration that started happening when, they started telling parents that they couldn't use corporal punishment, right? You can't use corporal punishment anymore, right? Well, back in the day when I was growing up, they still was able to use corporal punishment, even though it was kind of frowned upon. And that's where, because they couldn't use corporal punishment, they had to figure out a way to, to use manipulation. That's why manipulation had become so paramount, right? And it was happening in the homes, it was happening in the family, it was happening in society. Right? That's why we have some of the biggest emotionally manipulative people, in our generation. That's why some people, rather than deal with the emotional manipulation, they would just rather, just slap me, just punch me, whatever, right? And let's be done with this, right? Because it gets wicked. It gets really wicked, trying to emotionally manipulate people. It gets really wicked because some people are less emotional than others, and when people are used to getting their way through emotional manipulation, and then they come across somebody who's not emotional, they don't know what to do. They don't know what to do. They're like, what the hell? And then they start using slander, right? You're heartless, you're this and you're that, and it's just like, And sometimes they won't be successful in the slander, in using, the sword, right? They'll go to, actual physical battery and violence and abuse. Okay? So, and, since I've been here, I have noticed that, the South, they are still upset that, they did lose the war. And a lot of them did lose money. They may not have lost a lot of, property. But, because a lot of the Northerners, they didn't want to come and live in the South. They liked it where it was cooler, where they had the seasonal weather. They didn't like it getting hot, right? Being in 110 degree summers is just not their cup of tea, right? But now that they've evolved to the point where they're like, they can have several houses, right? Well, at least a couple of homes, right? And you'll hear them say this, that, they'll live here, during the summer, and then live somewhere else during the winter. And not everybody can talk like that, right? So and to be honest, even myself, I had considered, relocating during the summertime. I mean, during the winter time here. Well, maybe even the summertime, because it gets really hot here. And we didn't really, it was mildly cold. It wasn't cold, right? But after a few years of being here, I'd say about the 10th year here, then we started getting a little frost and icicles, and it's like, what is this? Right? Then we even got some snow. I'm like, what? How is this possible? So yeah. So they tried to get people to feel comfortable with the ideal and the notion that, they can do odd jobs like YouTube, the internet, and gig work. Right? However, I am starting to see that people are stating that they're not getting the that gig work isn't paying off, right? And even DoorDash, shout out to DoorDash, right? She said her phone service, Verizon, had went out of service for several days, right? And when it went out, she was right in the middle of a Spark delivery, right? Spark is delivery for Walmart, right? So like I said, even the warehouse, they're getting played out too, because people, they're just not ordering. We used to see Amazon trucks in our neighborhood all the time. Now it's every now and then. Okay. So I don't know what to say. But, they shouldn't. What I can say is that they shouldn't have let Bitcoins interfere with the market. The Bitcoin interference was the worst thing they ever could allow happen. You know, I pretty much feel like that's part of the reason why we're suffering now, is because you know, upon going digital, you know, people are able to see, you know, where the money is being moved to, right? So what they want to happen, this is what they want to happen. They want the whole digital money to fail to exist, so that they can continue the corruption. That's what they want, right? That's how they see it in other countries, right? Like Ukraine, right? Ukraine and some other areas that are affected by the war, right? They can't use the internet all the time, right? So they want to say cash only, right? And that's how a lot of people see things, you know, is that it's going to go back to, you know, basic cash only. Then they could, you know, start all over again. Because they don't want to be transparent, right? They still want to live in a society where, you know, they can duplicate, you know, dollar bills. I'm gonna have to go and buy me some more creamer. Oh, whenever I run out of creamer, life is just a tragedy. But I was somewhere and I seen that I think Aldi still have the peppermint bark, so I'm gonna go there, Aldi's, and see if I can get some of the peppermint bark. So yeah, so that was a lovely, lovely ride. And like I said, you know, I think the worst thing that they could do is, you know, to go back to cash money after spending all of this time going to digital. And like I said, digital money is where, you know, the frustration is occurring to a lot of people, because, you know, they cannot operate they can't do transactions without it being recorded digitally. You see what I'm saying? That's the thing that they hated most of all. And they're like, well, you know, if you know, if the government wants to, you know, they could just seize all your money. And it's just like, yeah, like we're really afraid of the government seizing our money. No, we're afraid of criminals seizing our money. Right? That's why most of these institutions, even like when they legalized the selling of marijuana, right? They legalized the selling of marijuana, but they said, look, you know, we are not going to protect that institution. That's an institution that, you know, we're not going to protect. The government is not going to protect, you know, these dispensaries. And once that word went out, that, oh my gosh, you could sell weed, but you know, you got to have your own army. You know, it kind of lost, you know, its lucrative flavor. When they started thinking about, you know, all the expenses involved with that. Traffic out. What is it? Friday the 16th of January, and it's 3:17. So yeah, that's a lot of traffic. So here's the thing that has changed in my life. What has changed in my life is the fact that I don't get to walk my dogs, right? The thing that made me happy about life was being able to take my dog, Snoopy, for a walk, right? And then I was like, well, maybe, you know, if I get another dog and then Snoopy trains this new dog, you know, if she passes away, then, you know, I would still like the idea of being able to go for a walk with my dog, even though it's a new dog. And I don't think that's going to happen. Okay? I just don't. So, well, now it's coming to a point where I'm like, okay, I'm going to probably, you know, get rid of the house, get rid of the dogs, and then, you know, keep what I can, and then just get rid of everything else. Right? Now, under those circumstances, then the van life situation starts to appeal to me. It's like, maybe, you know, you should, you know, think about getting a van. Right? Until I realistically think about, oh my gosh, you know, you have to be even more meticulous to live in a van. Right? You have to schedule, you know, where you're going to be, you know, when you can be there. Okay? You got so many places, you know, that don't let you, you know, park overnight. You have all your possessions in a vehicle that could be destroyed by one reckless driver. Right? So then my mind shifts to, well, maybe, you know, you should consider, you know, a vehicle and a trailer. Right? Now that seems to be the best way to go about it, right? Although You know, I was watching this one lady, single black woman, right? You know, tried to do that, right? First she started off with a van. Then she, you know, went and got her a truck and a trailer. And she was having all kinds of, you know, issues with the trailer, you know, and then she was having issues at these campgrounds because she was, you know, she didn't want to say it, but she was being targeted, you know, by racist people. They were coming along and they were destroying her property. Right? And, you know, she just, you know, couldn't believe it. So that hurted her so bad that she went and decided that she was going to get her an apartment. Right? I kind of stopped watching her after that because, you know, first of all, here's the thing. I kind of have a problem with people who have an iron in every fire. Okay? I have a problem with them. Right? And not only do you have an iron in every fire, but you want to be highlighted at every campfire. And it's just, you know, kind of seems, you know, histrionic to me that you would need, you know, to be the center of attention everywhere. Right? So my thought was, well, you know, she can do whatever she wants to do, and, you know, if she likes it, then, you know, I love it, right? However, like I said, you know, it just bothers me when you have these people, you know, who want to be the star wherever they go, and then they want to be involved with everything. And it's just like, why are you such, you know, a drama whore? Okay, you want to be seen everywhere, doing everything. You know, and it's just like, well, if you look this way, because they're over there, next thing you know, they'll make their way over here just so that you can see them over there. And you're like, well, I thought I just left you over there. What are you doing over here? You know, and they're like, keep looking at me. And then it's just like, we're going to get to the point where we just start saying you're nothing to look at. Right? We want something new to look at. So, this is where we're at. We're at the point where we want something new to look at. We're not entertained anymore. We're not entertained anymore. Oh, damn. We're not going to go up here in all that traffic. No, we're not. that shit is not going to be easy anywhere. It's not going to be easy anywhere. We just have to say it, right? Shit's not going to be easy anywhere. Right? So, our president loves to have conversations with people, and number one, he ain't gonna take no shit from nobody. He's just not. It's been my understanding he's been talking with all of these dang presidents at the other places. And I don't know. Look, it's almost like he's itching to have a fight. And that's so weird that, the majority of businesses that is, even able to try to do business has to be stuff like car washes, restaurants, because even stores, a lot of them, they just don't, they don't have the turnaround that's needed, right? Because you need a consistent turnaround.